This is the Creepypasta Survival Iceberg. I'll be starting with the more common, iconic entries until eventually I make it to the more obscure, messed up, and frankly impossible to outlive creepypastas. Each entry will be receiving a survival rating along with the best chance of making it out of a situation like this. I've made dozens of survival videos before, but this might have the most entities yet, so let's get into it. I've noticed that a lot of the entries in the initial layer of the iceberg are mostly kind of in similar phases, if that makes sense, like EXE slashers and other haunted video games. So I think I'm just going to start out by going over those in groups rather than individually, as some of them are extremely similar. Jeff the Killer is essentially a damaged youth that was pushed to become a murderer. Going viral from this image that I'm sure you've seen before, displaying him carving up his face and cutting off his eyelids. I'd like to note only half of this is from his own doing, the other half being caused by being bleached and burned by the bullies in his neighborhood. After this image was taken, he assumably went on to murder his family, being caught by his brother, who he told to go back to sleep, before likely murdering him too. Jane the Killer is essentially a Jeff spinoff, very similar but driven by grudges rather than insanity. She's often to kill more morally, so less of a threat overall. Eyeless Jack is a bit more disturbing because you never know he's there. You just simply wake up without kidneys and then you know you were his victim. Now I'm starting to notice that J names are popular with these slashers. So our next one, Laughing Jack, is essentially someone who poses as a clown toy only to reveal himself as some sort of supernatural killer hiding inside of your home. Now, most of these can be avoided by simply just not interacting with sketchy strangers in public, investing in a quality security system, and having a loaded weapon nearby. If this sounds like common sense, that's because it is. But these are probably the easiest we're going to get for today, so enjoy it while it lasts. If you haven't heard of the Russian sleep experiment, picture you're a Soviet scientist and your boss gives you a new assignment to keep a group of war criminals awake for weeks using a special gas. You tell them if they cooperate, they'll go free, but that's obviously going to be a lie. In reality, you need to see how long the human body can stay conscious before it breaks. At first, it's fine, but then the walls start to get covered by their filth and newspapers, and the intercom starts picking up strange phrases and screams. But you can't see inside. When you finally do open the chamber, what's left isn't human. Their skin is peeled, organs are torn out, but they're still moving and talking. They tell you that everyone has this sort of entity inside of them, and somehow sleep is able to keep it dormant. But without rest, it becomes all that's left, and their body seize up and they are dead almost instantly. Many scientists quit after what they saw, but if you somehow ended up as one of these test subjects, survival is nearly impossible. But maybe you could last a little longer by wetting a shirt, using it as a crude filter to lower the gas intake. Stay still, low to the ground, and just hope that the gas is lighter than air. Now, if all else fails, I had a theory that essentially, let's say you seize out the second you walk in there, then they might assume that you're not good for this test or you have an allergic reaction to the gas in some way, shape, or form, and if you're lucky, they'll take you out. Or at least they'll just make it quick. Now, the Slender sickness epidemic is essentially consisted of a psychological entity that many people were claiming were following them in the woods. And the worst part is despite this being thought to be some form of hallucination, eventually it would be seen showing up in their photos after they were killed. And it was all the same thing. A tall, blank-faced man in a suit standing behind them, watching from the background. Not to mention, some victims would often become violent, doing disturbing acts, claiming he made them do it. Because of this, many children ended up deceased at the hands of their own friends, only for another similar event to happen a few years later, spawning from this singular image, labeled Momo. This was said to randomly appear in YouTube videos, causing self-inflicted damage to hundreds of kids as they would believe that what the creature said and told them to do. Unfortunately, both of these cases had real-life death tolls and were serious problems. Now, I feel like I don't have to state that both of these could just be solved by watching your kids, but a more specific answer could be staying out of isolation and making sure these things have no way to get to you. For an example, with Momo, it only has as much power as people would give to it, as they thought it was some sort of supernatural entity that could harm them if they didn't do what it said, when it was really just some asshole across the world fucking with them, putting this image in front of it in order to trick people. The image itself isn't even a real edited image, just a statue made by some guy in Japan. With this in mind, you can easily block the number and just move on. On the other hand, Slender is a bit more difficult, but you could limit your amount of interactions with him by avoiding places like the woods or places that he often will show up. And if you do see him, immediately going to the nearest group of people, and he likely wouldn't follow you. On top of, not researching him, because apparently obsession plays a big factor in this, and if you learn more about him, he is likely to influence you more and more. Dead Bar and Squidward's are both lost episodes of beloved TV shows that the creators supposedly tried to bury, and have no clue how they even made it into development. Dead Bar is more based on everyone in the Simpsons family becoming more aggressive or depressed than usual. Then all of a sudden, Bart would get sucked out of a plane window on a trip and fall to his brutal death. This maimed corpse then comes back alive and torments his family before the episode ends. The Red Mist, on the other hand, rather than going about his life with relatable jokes or complaints, the reality of Squidward's life begins to weigh on him. It will get worse and worse until eventually he pulls out a certain type of weapon and graphically unalives himself. Now, alongside these lost TV shows, there's also a large amount of cursed video games. Ben Drown has essentially the source files of Majora's Mask, is that there's already a saved game cartridge labeled Ben preloaded. And if you enter it inside the game, it will play extremely off, with an odd smiling Link statue following you throughout the game, broken levels where the music plays backwards, along with almost sentient NPCs that burn you to death and often repeat the phrase, "You've met with a terrible fate, haven't you?" implying that the entity inside the game has now made it into your computer and possibly even your life itself. To reaffirm this, it will talk to you outside of the game, as well as claiming themselves to be Ben, a boy who, after drowning in a lake, found himself inside the game. But nothing would corrupt your PC as badly as the typical EXE games, mainly Sonic.exe, that starts taking control of your PC almost immediately after loading into it, forcing you to watch a gory remake of the beloved Sonic games. It starts with every character being horrified and Sonic himself being missing, until he brutally slaughters the characters each in their own unique ways, all while he laughs, jump scares you, and then interacts through the fourth wall with you, the player. Finally, the most iconic of the three, Herobrine is an old Minecraft legend where people would enter bizarre single-player seeds where nothing seemed right. Everything seemed cursed, only for them to repeatedly spot another player hiding in the mist. This was a truly bizarre event, as stuff like that didn't really just happen. And similar to Ben Drown, some people rumored that it was the soul of Notch's dead brother that inserted itself into the game. However, in my opinion, the scariest part would be when you place that last gold block or redstone torch and nothing happened, if you guys know what I'm talking about. Save your sanity and well-being, I suggest destroying any hard drives that have been corrupted by these games, or at bare minimum, formatting them. Now, the backrooms and SCP have both been covered in depth by a lot of other videos on my channel, so I don't even want to open that can of worms right now, so I suggest checking those out. The Aawwoki is an almost animatronic, uncanny recreation of the deceased pop legend Michael Jackson, said to inhabit abandoned buildings and dark alleyways, playing tidbits from his music on loop to lure people close enough. The only way that I see you surviving this is maybe, I don't know, not going towards random MJ music, or any music for that matter, coming from a dark place at night. That's generally a good rule of thumb. Candle Cove is an entire forgotten TV show from the 70s, barely remembered by people on certain subreddits, and the most recovered episode consists of a young pirate riding on a sentient ship that urges him to be brave and sail into an odd cave, which is the only thing in the middle of the ocean. Once eventually going inside, he's attacked by a puppet noticeably more disturbing than the rest, and when the episode replays, he mentioned how he feels like he is constantly being watched now. The Skin Taker, as he is rumored to be called, breaks the fourth wall and appears all over the episodes, leaving people wondering how this was a show for younger audiences. Regardless, this is going to be another NA for survival. Now, the No End House is supposedly a haunted house with 10 different rooms, with each room getting significantly worse than the last. Anything from like your worst fears in level 3 to later on seeing dead versions of yourself hanging from a hook on the ceiling, and then when you get to level 9, it almost seems like you've left, and it is a perfect recreation of the real world, only for you to realize that you are still inside the house. The No End House doesn't follow standard rules, with doors immediately locking behind you and the rooms being impossibly large. Unless you can realize something is wrong early and keep the doors open with something sturdy, the house is going to lock you in. Now, the silver lining with this seems to be the fact that this house prefers to attack you mentally rather than physically, and this means it won't directly kill you. However, you're going to need to find a way to constantly be pushing forward through the nightmares in this house if you ever expect to leave. If you do go in with the mentality that this is all fake, you might be able to make it through, and if you're quick, get less exposure and therefore have a higher chance of making it to the end, in which you'll collect your $500 reward, which at this point is just a kick in the chest and your therapy bills. The Expressionless is the nickname for an incident involving an Uncanny Valley looking woman who arrives at a hospital with a half-eaten cat in her mouth. twitching yet remaining unresponsive, before she murders the entire staff, claiming, "I am God." She possesses raw amounts of animalistic strength and likely is best survived by hiding and letting her leave. There doesn't seem to be any extreme intelligence, so when seeing what should be the obvious warning signs that something is wrong, find somewhere it won't wander or just leave the area before it goes on a rampage. Abandoned by Disney is a reference to the graffiti commonly sprayed over an abandoned Treasure Island resort in the Bahamas. For various reasons, it was left to decay with disturbing statues, gutted buildings, and oddly, a large python snake living in the brush. However, the most disturbing encounter was documented by a Redditor who took it to the next level, going deeper into the park where the mascots used to dress up before shows. Inside, they found a Donald Duck head with a human skull inside, which for some reason didn't make them run right off the bat. Instead, it would take an inverted Mickey suit, standing up from the ground, quoting, "Do you want to see my head come off?" before goring itself and gushing yellow liquid all over the floor. While escaping, the man noticed "Abandoned by God" scripted on the wall above the door. Now, this place seems fairly survivable, as most of these events seem to be more traumatic than deadly, so there isn't really anything stopping you from following the footsteps of the narrator and just running out of the place. And let's say the inverted Mickey did somehow try to run you down, he doesn't really have his head and wouldn't make it very far. And I would assume any healthy adult could outrun him. The strangest videotape I've ever seen is the security footage of a gas station that has been labeled an extreme anomaly. It appears to loop repeatedly, showing customers buying the same things over and over again, and a corrupted face of a supposed worker on the screen, followed by a ton of motor oil disappearing. This was investigated, but the worker was only able to be tracked back to the remains of a destroyed homestead that was burned to the ground by a long dead son who eerily looked identical to the worker appearing on the tapes. The worst part is the manager at the station claims to have this Jeremy currently employed. This one, again, isn't deadly, just bizarre and creepy. The Smiling Man phenomenon is an entity that finds people who walk in secluded places at night and toys with them with his bizarre movements, quick disappearances, and wide-toothed grin. Although you would initially just think he would just be a drugged up individual, he's anything but, often dancing towards you in an extremely creepy and ominous manner. It is assumed that if he catches you, you will go missing, but none of his victims have been found. So it's probably best to walk with at least 2 people at night, along with making sure you don't go into sketchy areas, as it will exponentially lower the risk of you falling into this sort of weird trap. Mouse.avi is a extremely aged video file that was recovered from an unknown source. The video contains a Mickey looking distraught walking down an endless street, with the audio getting more and more disturbing until eventually it is assumed he takes his life in a graphic way similar to the red mist from earlier. It is recommended that you do not watch this video as it has extremely disastrous mental effects. The Midnight Game is a surprisingly frequently practiced pagan ritual, disguised as a sleepover game, that when played invites a demon into your home. The reason people do shit like this willingly, I will never understand. However, if you do find yourself foolish enough to invite the Midnight Man, you must make sure that you at least carry 2 candles rather than the instructed 1. This will make it much easier to relight the first should it be blown out. Now, this might be a stupid thing to say, but to me, it seems like weatherproof matches would be effective against this, as they're kind of harder to blow out than normal matches, and you wouldn't have to risk like a malfunction mid-lighting your candle. But since it's supernatural and all, I don't think it would have a problem blowing this out anyways, but you might as well give it a try. They do kind of recommend like a salt circle towards the end if you fuck up in lighting the candle, but I don't understand why you wouldn't just do that right off the bat or already have one pre-made so then you could just step into it quickly, either immediately or when things start to go bad. Because if you do fail both of these, he's going to fill your mind with your worst fears while he rips all your organs out of your body. And yes, you're going to be alive for all of this. Pen pal is the nickname for a criminal case involving a young boy being obsessively stalked his entire life, starting with him being kidnapped and brought to the middle of the woods as a child, then discovering this person has become their pen pal during a school project, and eventually going as far as murdering the people around them and dressing up their friend in his clothes because they look similar, and then taking his corpse and burying them together, likely still alive. Now, the only way around this, assuming you are his victim, is to make sure that you don't go down the exact same route, as it'll make it very easy for him to follow you. On top of that, you're going to want to make sure that is heavily fortified with a large amount of motion alarms, security systems, etc., etc. making sure to check and lock off areas like basements or crawl space. There are parts in the story where he hides there for years, stalking them. It's also probably a good idea to get some sort of guard dog that would catch him if he was, say, hiding in the bushes or underneath somewhere where you weren't thinking to look. As a last resort, moving states away would likely be effective as well, as in the story they really kind of only moved a couple towns, and that made it easy for him to follow. The Rake is a skinwalker-like entity said to date back thousands of years. It is known for entering your room while you sleep, and if you wake up and notice it, it can easily murder large amounts of your family or other things that you live with, not to mention yourself. It whispers something in an unknown language and will often cause horrible things to happen in your life, like car accidents or freak injuries. The only way you're surviving this thing is by turning your bedroom into Alcatraz, reinforcing your doors and windows, setting up motion alarms as to keep this thing from sneaking up on you, and above all, do not respond to its voice. Gateway of the Mind is the name of an experiment by a group of religious scientists looking to prove the existence of heaven and God by severing all the sensory nerve connections to the brain of a volunteer so they can no longer see, hear, smell, taste, or feel, but they are kept alive. The subject begins to hear voices of dead loved ones of the scientists saying things only they would know. As days went on, he began to be excessively tormented by hundreds of hostile voices until he was begging for death. "No heaven, no forgiveness," was a line he repeated over and over for hours. After weeks of this torment, the blinded old man turned directly to a scientist and whispered, "I have spoken with God, and he has abandoned us," before immediately dying. Yeah, I'm not even going to try with this one, as it's more of a specific experiment rather than an unwilling choice. And if I were to give some advice, I don't think it'd be appropriate for YouTube. Polybius is an old arcade machine that is debated on whether it even existed. Rather than it simply running a retro game, everyone who played it reported various negative mental effects such as psychosis, headaches, nightmares, and losing their memories. The game itself has odd sounds like women crying and grotesque faces, not to mention people have claimed that they see weird men in suits visiting the machine on a frequent basis, inserting more subliminal messages and retrieving mental data of the users. The trick here is that Polybius would not be deadly after the first use, so you would likely be fine if you just never used one again after your first encounter with it. Mr. Widemouth is an entity that takes advantage of extreme illness to trick its victims. Initially, you won't be able to tell whether it's real or not, as it almost appears like a gigantic stuffed animal. It starts off with nice normal interaction, only for it to start getting more extreme with stuff like him waking you up in the middle of the night to do dangerous tasks. If you do end up remembering him following the sickness, you will never really be able to confirm whether he existed at all. However, there's typically a path that he shows you while you were sick, and if you go back and follow it, it'll lead you ominously to a massive gravesite full of assumably his victims. Since he only appears when you're in an extremely weak and vulnerable state, it is often going to be hard to fully survive him, especially if you are vulnerable to his manipulation. So the easiest way would be to just ignore him, or in a less damaging, illegal way, just move away. Zalgo is an eldritch entity who targets either a single person or a group of people. Signs start with people around the affected visibly acting weird, only for their eyes to suddenly go completely soulless and black, claiming Zalgo is coming. This quote-unquote Zalgo effect can go as far as affecting an entire room of people around you, members of your family, and friends of any strangers that you encounter. There have also been reports of it affecting newborn babies the second they are born. Eventually, it is going to escalate into tentacles coming out of the walls and attempting to pull you down into wherever its domain really is. It is recommended that if you begin to see signs, immediately flee to a place where there are no people affected by this, but in full honesty, it's likely going to affect everybody around you, and unless you completely isolate yourself, you're probably not going to be safe. The YouTube video Marena Mordegard Glesgorv is an extremely dangerous hazard that the YouTube moderators are attempting to keep off the internet. At first glance, this video appears just to be a man staring intently into the camera and grinning at the very end. But this is only a small part of the full video. Originally, this was a sort of cognito hazard that forces the watcher to gouge their eyes out and mail it to YouTube's main office before taking their own life. There is no way to prevent this unless you immediately are repeatedly sedated until the severe mental effects wear off. It is unknown who made the video or who the man in the video is. Similarly, User666 is another extremely hazardous YouTube search that contains extremely buggy, virus-like, and gory material that you can't really tell what's going on. it will corrupt your PC immediately, forcing you to rip the cord out of the wall for it to stop. I hope you guys enjoyed the first part of the iceberg. I'll make part 2 based off how y'all like this one. I really like bringing horror content into real life on this channel, plus it was super fun to research.